we're just gonna go ahead and get started because I feel like if I don't, we're gonna be waiting a while for them to settle down. And so, welcome to my cutie pies. Hi, you guys. You wanna be in Mama's video? Is that all you wanted? Hi, Stinks. Okay. Okie dokies. You wanna give them a life update? You wanna tell, I'm sorry for talking in the doggy baby voice. You wanna tell them what we've been up to? Life update. I moved out of the state of Illinois. This past summer, I moved to a different state, and it has been wonderful since then. I don't know what this is, but we're doing it. I moved out of Illinois, obviously, because of all the trauma and triggers, and just my PTSD was really bad when I was living back home where I grew up. And so I moved to a new state, and it has been wonderful since then. My PTSD has been so much better, and that is something that I am really grateful for. And I'm in a place that's really calming. It's been really, really good for me. And so that's like one big life update. Ignore their tails situation going on here. You're so cute. All right, so let's talk about justice and my pursuit of justice and where things stand and where I personally stand with my healing and my pursuit of justice and where I'm gonna go with all of this. And so, as you know, the man who killed my dogs and abused me was never arrested for what he did to my dogs or me. The only repercussions he ever faced from the legal system were when he violated the order of protection against me, and he was arrested for that back a week after I escaped him. So this is about 1.5 years ago now at this point. He ended up pleading guilty to the 2 violations of the order of protection. You want to tell a story? Want to tell a story? Yeah? So as you know, my abuser, the man who abused me and killed my dogs, never faced any repercussions in the legal system for what he did to me and my dogs. The only thing was that he was arrested when he violated the order of protection against me, and he was arrested. He pleaded guilty to that, and that was back in July of 2020. So that was a week after I had escaped him. And he pleaded guilty to that in October of 2020. And part of the terms of his conviction were he would get put on a year of probation, and he had to check in with his probation officer all the time, obviously. He had to do 20 hours of community service. He had to do court-mandated mental health evaluation, court-mandated domestic violence counseling, and he had to pay about $1,000 in fine, which I will get to later in this video, but he himself did not pay the fine. He manipulated somebody else into paying it, which is who he is. Disgusting. Other than that, there were no criminal repercussions for anything that he did. And for a long time, that really devastated me. And because the criminal justice system didn't do anything to hold him accountable, I decided that I would. And so I filed a civil lawsuit against him, and we filed it on February 16th, 2021. In the lawsuit, we sued him for 3 things. 1, for the abuse and torture of Daisy, for the abuse and torture of Kirby, and for intentional infliction of emotional distress against me. My attorney said it's really hard to go for torture because you have to prove intent for the first 2 counts of, well, the abuse against my dogs. But she said we very much had a case for it. And so we included that and sued him for what he did against me. Here's a timeline of what the civil lawsuit looked like. So February 16th, we filed. On February 17th, they published my story. So it was picked up by the Chicago Sun-Times. My story was picked up by the Daily Herald. That was picked up by USA Today. And it got a lot of attention, obviously being on the front page of the Chicago Sun-Times. It took them 2 months to declare him served because he kept evading service. Finally, they served him at his place of residence of what I knew to be in Midlothian, Illinois, the house that he had taken me to and I knew to be his residence. It wasn't him who answered the door, but they saw his car in the driveway and said, "We are effectively serving you." And so that was back in April of 2021. We had our first court date, I would say back in June, for the lawsuit, because Matt didn't respond to anything. He was just like a ghost kind of in the wind. Like there was no acknowledgement of anything. And so we had court, and my attorney had filed a motion for default, meaning because Matt hadn't responded in any way, shape, or form to this lawsuit, she wanted to go forward with us just winning automatically because we had been putting in this work, we had been showing up for court and everything, and he hadn't done anything. So back in June, Matt finally showed up for court. We had this judge who was really great. She would have been really great with our case, I imagine. Matt didn't turn his camera on or anything. The judge was really compelling him to turn his camera on, but he didn't. And he was like, "Oh, I want to file an answer. I don't know what I'm supposed to do. I want to file." And so the judge was like, "Okay, that's your right. I'm going to put this back to the central hub. You file your paperwork. It'll be reassigned to a different judge, but we'll go from there." And so Matt filed his paperwork saying, he acknowledged receipt of this lawsuit, that he didn't want this to go forward in default, right? That he wanted to be an active participant in like this whole case and everything. He had told so then we had another court date, like July or August, probably, I think August, with a new judge, bleeding heart, like really great, nice guy who very much granted the benefit of the doubt to somebody who was representing himself. And because Matt was like, "I don't have money for an attorney. I don't know what I'm supposed to do, blah, blah." And the judge was like, "Okay, you file this, say you're going to represent yourself, and then we'll go forward." So then we had court a month later in August. I am getting my timelines mixed up because we had court like 10 times. It was a lot. So then we had court again in September, and Matt filed the paperwork saying he was going to represent himself, but he didn't file an answer, which is what he was supposed to do. So the judge said, "Okay, I'm going to give you September, October, November. I'm going to give you about a month and a half to file this paperwork saying you either deny all allegations that Sarah presented in her lawsuit, or you admit to everything." Those are the two options. Obviously, if you deny, then it goes forward with court, trial, whatever. Then, after that court date, my attorney started talking to me about, "Hey, look, this might go to trial. Based on what the judge is doing, what Matt is doing," she was like, "we should prepare," because the judge offered to do a bench trial, which means that he would just hear the cases and everything, and it wouldn't have to go to a jury trial. She said that one would take a couple months. He probably wouldn't grant a high judgment amount, meaning that we wouldn't win as much money, but she said it would be over in fewer months. It would be cheaper for me, as opposed to a jury trial with COVID and everything. She said it probably wouldn't happen for at least like maybe 2 years or so. But there is something to be said about presenting your case to 12 strangers and letting them decide the fate and, hearing the truth and everything. And so I was like, okay. And I was like, well, bench trial might be easier. So then court on November 4th. And mind you, I'm a teacher. I get very limited days that I can take off. And I was taking off all these days for court. And the court hearings would take about 10 minutes each. So I would take like a half day or a full day off of work for this, for a 10-minute court hearing. And so that was it was messed up, honestly, right? I'm the victim. I'm looking for justice for me and my dogs. And I'm just being like pulled along because Matt's manipulating the court and all of this and just kind of playing this game. And I'm just being strung along, like, because I had to be, right? Because that was the process of the court, which was also frustrating because I had to pay for my attorney for all of this. So there's that. So on November 4th, I don't think I went to that court date. Yes. So on November 4th, my attorney contacted me because I don't think I was able to go to court that day because I was like, if it's 10 minutes again, like I can't keep taking time off of work for this. And she was like, okay, now I'll go let you know, have your phone in case we need you, which they didn't. Matt showed up and again was like, I don't know how to file this paperwork. I want to, blah, blah, blah. Again, denying or admitting to all of my allegations. The judge was like, okay, one more time. Here's where you do the stuff. You got to file an answer. So then we had court 3 weeks later, to be scheduled for 3 weeks later. And this was the day that I was going to head home to Chicago for the Thanksgiving holiday. So I had court in the morning and then I was going to drive back to Chicago that night. So we go to court and it's on Zoom. And this judge that we had was also subbing for another judge that was out for knee surgery. And so there were like 15 attorneys and stuff in the Zoom courtroom with us and everything. And it took a while for us to be heard, which was fine because our case was kind of more serious. Well, obviously more serious than the other cases, which were like suing banks and stuff. Okay. So at the end, Matt's like, oh, I think I filed the paperwork. And my attorney's like, we didn't get anything. The judge is like, I didn't get anything. The court clerk is like, I didn't get anything. And Matt's like, oh, well, it says this, it says. And this, he's like, let me look through my email and find it for you. I have an email somewhere. So in front of the court, in front of all these attorneys, this, looks, through his stuff. Again, camera off. He doesn't have his camera on once throughout this whole court process. He's looking at his email, whatever, going, like, sorry. Clicking like that in front of I was just like, dude, that's like embarrassing. You're an embarrassment of a person, but okay. So then he was like, let me email this to you. And the judge was like, okay, fine. And the judge gets it. He was like, yeah, that's not an answer. I'm going to go forward with this motion for default. And we were like, yeah, we were like, finally, that was like a huge win to know the judge was entering Matt's answer for him. And so this is what happened. The judge defaulted the judgment because Matt hadn't filed anything. And this was about 10 months into the lawsuit at this point, mind you. He didn't file anything. And so the judge admitted Matt's answer for him as admitting to all allegations, meaning that Matt was no longer able to deny anything. And at our next court date, it was going to be explaining why we should get X number of dollars rather than if Matt did this. And that was a huge thing to know. Okay, we won. How much we get, we don't know, but we won. So the judge said, okay, I kind of have a busy day ahead. Can we meet back in a few weeks and we can do the prove up for damages, which means I testify to everything that Matt did and share my story and everything. The judge hears it and then decides how much money Matt owes me. Okay, fine. So in December, one of the last weeks of December, we're supposed to have court again. And I had been working with the Animal Legal Defense Fund to get justice because they work on the legal side of things for animal abuse. And they had a forensic veterinarian analyze the autopsies of Kirby and Daisy and write a report saying, yes, this was absolutely blunt force trauma. Yes, absolutely, Matthew Berry did this, all of this. And so she was going to testify at court for us to say, yes, medically, This all proves that he did this. And this was severe damage, you know, severe infliction of emotional distress on the dogs, severe hurt from them, all of that. So she was lined up to come to court on like December 20th. I was supposed to be there. I took off work for it. My attorney was going to be there. I had hired a court reporter, which is like not a cheap thing, but we wanted to cover our bases. And so we had all these things lined up. So a few days before we're supposed to have court, my attorney emails the court to verify, you know, hey, I had this paperwork, you know, X, Y, and Z. And the court's like, oh, can we change the time? And my attorney's like, ooh, we cannot. It's a couple days before. We can't do that. And the judge is like, okay, well, then we're going to change the date. We're like, okay. So then I didn't take the day off of work. I went to work, and my attorney emails me after the supposed time of the court date. That was canceled, according to my understanding in the emails. And she was like, we had court, Matt showed up. Again, Matt said, I really want to file an answer. I don't want this to go to default. What do I do? And the judge was like, okay, well, here's where the stuff is. And I'm like, are you? Because I'm like, last time I knew we were winning. The judge said like this was defaulted. This was supposed to be like, all right, how much does Matt owe me? That kind of thing. So then court was pushed back a few more weeks. And up until, so this is now about 2 weeks ago at this point. It was January 10th. I want to say Monday, January 10th, we had court. And I took the morning off of work because I'm like, I don't know what's going to happen. I don't know what's going to happen. We don't know if Matt filed his answer, if the judge was going to accept it, whatever. So we had court again. We have the vet show up. We have the court reporter. We have me, my attorney, Matt's there, the judge, everything, court clerks. It's a big thing, right? And Matt hadn't filed any paperwork. And so it went forward with a prove up. And I was like, it was kind of like surreal because you get used to court being such like a letdown about like what's going to happen. What is this going to look like? So you're not like necessarily emotionally prepared or in the state of mind to just like share your whole story again. But it went forward and we did the prove up. And the vet went first and she testified to everything and, you know, all of these signs of blunt force trauma and everything. And the judge explained to Matt, by the way, Matt, for the first time in a year, he had his camera on. Granted, it was looking at the ceiling. We couldn't see his face. But technically he had his camera on, so it's okay. Anyway. So the vet testifies, and at the end of that, the judge says, Mr. Berry, do you have any questions for her? Because you're allowed to like cross-examine her. And he said, no. He said, I'm just confused about how with Daisy, and like when he said her name, I'm like, it irritated me. I'm like, you don't get to say her name. Like, you're not entitled to her name. You don't know, it bothered me. She always knows when I get stressed, and so she's here because she's like, Mom, I'm your emotional support dog. We're here together for this. As you're tired, but okay. So the judge says, Matt, do you want to cross-examine the witness? Matt says, no, I just don't understand how with Daisy, I thought she died of, mesenteric rent. So I'm just confused about how it went from mesenteric rent, a natural cause of death, to blunt force trauma. But no questions for damages. And the judge was like, okay, so let me explain this for a second. When Daisy died, the vet did an autopsy and said, Daisy died of some sort of trauma. I don't know what it was exactly. She said a possibility is that it was a mesenteric rent, which means that her insides just were all torn up and mangled and hurt and just destroyed. And she said that could have been a pre-existing thing. Like, we didn't know. That's why I had this forensic veterinarian look at the report, and she has worked with animal abuse for her entire career of 30 plus years. And she looked at this and she was like, well, the mesenteric rent it's like a tear in the intestines and the liver and all of that. And she said, but that is a sign of blunt force trauma. And she said that's because Matthew Berry delivered a single blow. She said most likely in the form of a kick, just a single blow. And that based on the angle and everything and like the injuries, it shows that it went at this certain angle and it just destroyed all of X, Y, and Z organs. And so back to Matt saying, I thought it was a mesenteric rent. What he was essentially saying, and he didn't know this because he was like, wait, I thought Daisy died of blunt force trauma. What do you mean she died of blunt force trauma? Like, he sounds so, okay. So anyway, so I'm gonna move on to me testifying. And my attorney's asking me these questions about, you know, how many times Matt abused Daisy and how many times he abused Kirby. And then my attorney's asking me about the damages that I have suffered. And I said, well, I was diagnosed with anxiety, depression, and PTSD. I said I had to move out of the state because of the triggers and feeling unsafe in the area. She said, you know, kind of, can you explain more about that? Like, what other things have you suffered? I said, with the PTSD, I have suffered severe panic attacks that, like, essentially corrupted my daily life, right? Because I had severe panic attacks. My triggers were severe. I said it disrupted my sleep. I wasn't able to sleep for months. I wasn't able to concentrate, and all of these, I mean, the list goes on of what I have, but that's kind of what I was mentioning to the court. We were talking about me being in therapy and how I have to see a trauma specialist to work through my PTSD and my trauma, obviously. And so we're saying all of this, and I'm saying this in Matt's presence. Like, he's there, he's pissed. I know he's pissed, which is like, yeah. So my attorney goes through and lists every act of abuse that Matt did against Daisy, that he committed against Kirby, and everything he did against me. And I'm like gonna cry as I think about this too, because that was like the first time that, like, I was glad that I didn't have to say that, because I was like, I'm gonna cry if I have to talk about this again. Like, just the emotional, like, oh my God, like, I'm finally saying this in front of the court, in front of Matt, like. And so I'm glad that my attorney said it. And as she was talking about the abuse that he inflicted on Kirby, I was like my natural, like, trauma response was almost to smile. And I didn't, because I was like, I can't do this in court because you're not gonna understand. But like, she was talking about some of the things he did to Kirby, and I was just like, oh my God, like, that's my reality. And he did that to my dog, like, these horrible things, like, unimaginably horrible, that he did to my dogs. And just hearing it, it's like, wow. So anyway, at the end of that, the judge asked Matt if he wanted to cross-examine me, and he said no. But he said it like this: no. No. About damages, no. I mean, I guess I can't ask, you know, we can't talk about if I did this or not, but no questions about damages. I'm like, are you okay? Clearly not. And that's the point where I was like, he was so mad being there. I knew he was upset. Rightfully so, because you're a who killed my dogs and abused me. But I took away his power. Even just saying that is like, wow. I took away his power. I took him out of his comfort zone. I had the power. I have the power. I have control. and he doesn't. And that put him off because I was the one who called him to court. I was the one who said, what you did to me and my dogs is not okay. And I'm the one who called him there. I'm the one who called everyone together because of what he did, and I was holding him accountable, and I have held him accountable for what he did to me and for what he did to my dogs. All the horrors he inflicted on me and my dogs, I, the survivor, the victim of that, but now the survivor, I am the one that is calling my abuser to task for that. And that in itself is just... So he was uncomfortable. And the judge said, okay, how much are you asking for? My attorney gave him the number, and she said, we're asking for upwards of $450,000 for vet bills, for the actual abuse that Matt inflicted on my dogs, and how I had to pay money for the vet bills and autopsies and all of that, thousands and thousands of dollars. Therapy costs for me, attorney fees, obviously. We're suing for the actual abuse he did to Kirby and Daisy, which we can ask for a minimum of $500 per act of abuse and a maximum of $25,000 per act of abuse. We reported about 19 or 20 acts of abuse for the lawsuit. I counted about 50 or so, but for the sake of the lawsuit, I was like, that's fine, it's still a lot of money. And so that's why we're asking for like $450,000. The judge said, okay, let me look this over. Can I get back to you in about 30 days or so once I've made my decision about damages? And we were like, yeah, that's fine. He said he'll email us his decision. So that's where we are. We're waiting right now for the judge to email us his decision about how much money Matthew Berry owes me for abusing me and killing both of my dogs. We're not expecting the full amount, which is totally understandable. And for me, it comes down to, it's not about the money, because I would not keep any of the money for myself. If I got any money from him, and I want to say when, but if, because he's a broke, but okay. It's about the principle of it. And if I got a single penny from him, that's all being donated to charity and stuff. Like the two organizations that helped me the most, I would donate it. And so that's where we are right now. We're waiting for the judge to decide.